Endangered species figure prominently in many Western environmental issues, and the region is home to a number of biodiversity hotspots. In this presentation, we show where federally protected species are found and review the history of Endangered Species Act listings. There are more than 1,200 endangered species in the U.S., but a small subset tends to generate the lion's share of attention. Here are some of the notable endangered species in the West, where they're found, and how they've figured into public policy debates. Although species protected by the ESA sometimes do have significant economic and regulatory impacts, most of the plants and animals protected by the law are not lightning rods for controversy. Let's take a look at where endangered species live. This map analyzes endangered species by counties. You can see that there is often considerable variation within single states like California and Nevada, where one county may have more than 10 listed species, while an adjoining county has none. Hawaii, the Pacific Coast, the Southwest, Appalachia, and Florida stand out for their large number of listed species, but many U.S. counties, especially in the Midwest, have no threatened or endangered species. Here's the state-by-state breakdown. Hawaii has far and away the most listed species with nearly 400. The archipelago's native biodiversity, which includes many endemic species that have evolved in isolation and are found nowhere else on Earth, has been devastated by the introduction of non-native plants and animals. On the mainland, California has the most listed species, followed by Alabama, Florida, Texas, and Tennessee. The Dakotas are at the bottom of the list. Species are supposed to be added to the endangered list solely on the basis of biology and whether they're endangered, regardless of the economic impact. But many studies of the Act have found that politics frequently intrude in the listing process. This chart shows how many species have been listed as threatened or endangered on a cumulative basis. Although the ESA was enacted in 1973, some species were listed under a precursor to the law in the late 1960s. If you overlay the terms of the U.S. presidents, you can see that listings really leveled off during George W. Bush's 2 terms. Here's another look at the same data. This graphic shows how many species were listed as threatened or endangered each year. That sharp decline around 1995 is due to a moratorium on new listings that was enacted by Congress after the Republican Revolution of 1994. This graphic shows how many species each president listed under the ESA, on average per year in office. Environmentalists had a tough time getting species listed during George W. Bush's 2 terms, but the rate under Ken Salazar's Interior Department is less than half the rate when Bruce Babbitt was in charge of Interior during the Clinton administration. Many species that the Fish and Wildlife Service has judged at risk of extinction are not receiving protection from the ESA. By the mid-2000s, nearly 300 had been declared as candidates, meaning their listing was biologically warranted but precluded by budgetary constraints. This list is akin to the queue waiting to board Noah's Ark, because species that are candidates don't receive the same strong federal protections as threatened and endangered species. The Obama administration has made some progress in reducing the number of candidates from about 250 at the start of the first term to 192 in November 2012. As with endangered species, Hawaii, the Pacific Coast, the Southwest, Appalachia, and Florida tend to have the most candidate species. We've talked about how species get added to the list, but what about delistings under the ESA? This hasn't happened very often since 1973, less than 50 times. In 20 cases, a species was declared recovered and no longer in need of ESA protection. 18 times, the government decided the original listing was in error, often because of taxonomic changes or the discovery of new populations. In 9 cases, a species protected by the ESA has been declared extinct. At a high level, this graphic summarizes the story of the ESA. Hardly any species that have received federal protection have gone extinct, but less than 2% of listed species have recovered sufficiently so they could be delisted. You can download more slides, data, and other resources on this topic and other environmental issues at ecowest.org.